Well, good morning. Welcome to Thursday morning at the 2022 Sport Fishing Summit, celebrating 90 years of the association called the American Sport Fishing Association today. We're so glad you're here and hope you enjoyed yesterday. And it's as much about the information that was exchanged, it's the networking, it's the relationships, it's the people in this room that make this industry and the association so great. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors again for supporting us here this week. And they're here in this room. Make sure that you say hello to them at all levels there. And I appreciate you guys for supporting us for this great event. Today we've got kind of a different topic, something that we probably haven't touched on too much in the association to date, although it came up yesterday in the membership meeting. And that is that when you're in Washington, D.C., there's a lot of conversation that goes on regarding topics like sustainability and climate and culture and even outdoor recreation has become a much bigger topic. And these are big issues, and they're easy to say and can be difficult to address, especially with the political climate and everything else that goes with that. And so today, this isn't about having somebody's opinion one way or the other, how they feel about these things, but it's an opportunity for us to share with each other and to broaden the conversation and include some ideas that maybe some companies haven't spent a lot of time thinking about to this point. And maybe we should start thinking about it some, as well as just understanding that there's a lot of companies out here doing a lot of great things in this room and on this stage, and outside of this room for that matter, to ensure that we have a future in fishing because of conservation efforts and because of sustainability and because of all the work we're doing as far as being good stewards. And so I'm excited to have these four individuals specifically that I handpicked from the industry to join us today. I'm going to give you a quick introduction of them. Martin Peters, and not this quick, but I'll just mention Martin Peters, Stephanie Vatalaro, we have Diane Bristol and Casey Shedd. And I just want to give you a real quick background on these folks if you didn't have a chance to read up on them. So Martin is our Division Manager, External Affairs for Yamaha's U.S. Marine Division or business. He leads the government relations and advocacy and conservation efforts and the Yamaha Right Waters sustainability efforts. So for 15 years, Martin's been really has had a real impact not only on conservation but also on the business of Yamaha and the future that they have, to the point where his efforts earned the prestigious Fisheries Conservation Award from the ASA at our summit 3 years ago. We also have with us Diane Bristol, who's the Vice President of Culture and Community Engagement at Simms Fishing Tackle. Now, she's been with Simms 30 years coming up this winter and has a unique perspective on really helping organizations identify and develop leaders, but also how you evaluate Simms at all levels of the business and involvement in the community. And she serves on many boards and councils and serves with me on the RBFF board. And speaking of RBFF, we have with us Stephanie Vatalaro, who's the Vice President of Marketing and Communications at RBFF. And she grew up a daughter of a flats fishing guide in the Florida Keys. But today she leads the consumer and stakeholder outreach strategy for RBFF. And her job for the last 15 years is about getting more people out on the water, fishing and boating, and also supporting the good stewardship of aquatic and natural resources. And then at the end we have Casey Shedd, certainly not least. He is the president of AFTCO and is a rising star in our sport fishing industry, if you didn't know. And also, if you didn't know, he is the son of our famous Bill Shedd. Besides running the AFTCO business, Casey is responsible for overseeing AFTCO's freshwater conservation programs. But they also are doing so much more. So I'm excited to hear what Casey has to share with us. So with that, please welcome our panelists. We're going to have a seat. No longer Regis and Kathy Lee, thankfully. We are into, these are the all-stars here that we have in the industry. And so we're going to jump right in, and we're going to cover a combination of those topics I just mentioned. But I want to start us off back to the participation side. So Stephanie, with the respect to the future participation in our sport, what do you think are the real challenges that we're facing in the future?
There's a lot of challenges that we're facing. If I had to kind of drum it down to a few things, we've obviously got a traditional participant that skews more avid white male. We have a new cohort coming in that looks and engages completely differently with fishing as an activity. We have things competing for those people's time like never before. There are so many things you can choose to do, and if you did not grow up going fishing, it may not be on your radar at all. We also have a churn problem that has been talked about certainly in the Market Insights Committee, but we are losing more people each year than we're bringing in, and it's actually been getting worse over the last 5-6 years. So we need to really nip that in the bud and get some great strategies out there to retain the folks we're bringing in.
Yeah, I agree with you completely on that. And it's something that all of us have to address, and we're going to spend more time talking about that this morning. I'm going to shift gears quickly to Diane. As a company, Sims has a positioning statement called "Fish It Well," which is really cool, and you have a lot about shared responsibility with the community. Could you tell us more about that?
You bet. So we actually thought of Fish It Well and our positioning statement pre-COVID, so kind of early 2020. And it's become even more relevant, both internally and externally. And I'll just share a couple of data points. A 2022 McKinsey research study showed that 70% of employees say their personal sense of purpose is defined by their work. And when work feels meaningful and they will perform better and are much more committed. So Fish It Well for us is a roadmap that we follow that really identifies how we show up in the community, how we show up for our employees, and what are those proof points that we utilize to know how we're doing and to track and measure ourselves. So I'm a big proponent for, and we are at Sims, of identifying metrics and goals. And so with Fish It Well, we've identified how we respect and protect our fisheries for clean water and access, and we embrace all anglers, and we work together to ensure fishing for the future generations. So when we talk with our team members, we're using common language, and then when we are outward facing to the community, we're thinking about this, and we're thinking about how are we engaging with folks, how are we asking our customers to activate, how are we educating them on conservation and asking them to activate. And that builds a better customer and more loyal base for us as well. So it's been a really solid foundation that we've utilized to help guide us.
I think it's really cool because it comes back to relationships again. And so understanding who these future customers are and then building a relationship with them just makes so much sense.
That's right.
So let's talk about conservation for a minute here, or a couple of minutes actually. Casey, we've heard that AFTCO is a conservation-first business, and giving 10% of your profits towards conservation. What does that mean to you and AFTCO, and what is it that you're doing about that?
Yeah, so, there's a financial piece to that, of course. Last year it was something, I think it was $540,000, donated to a lot of groups in this room and others, right? But that's sort of just the start of it. And that legacy is really credit to Dad and his dad, as far as, seeing a need 30 years ago around, man, we get so much joy and satisfaction out of this sport, right? How do we create a business model that gives back? And so it's a bit of a flywheel in that the more we succeed, the more we grow, the more funds that produces to give back into it, right? And hopefully we get recognition for that. We can do more business. We can then give more funds. We get recognition for that. So it's a bit of a flywheel in that sense. So there's the financial piece, of course. There's the government affairs piece, which we really lean on ASA for in a big way and get involved in with Mike Leonard and his team. There's a community outreach piece, which I think Sims is honestly excellent at, like a real leader at, as far as taking a message and then using social platforms and your email list and your website to, how do we, as the brands, we're really one of the major touch points for a lot of these issues. The reality is that the ASA or RBFF don't have the reach that we have in this room. And so how do we take an issue from CCA or BTT who's in this room or one of the youth fishing groups and get that out there? And then the third piece or the fourth piece is the sustainability piece, which is a new thing for us. And what we kind of felt was, gosh, we do all this stuff externally. We're not doing crap internally. you know, the reality was the amount of, you know, the millions of poly bags that we're putting out into the environment. So some stats around plastics is there's equivalent of a dump truck full of plastic added to our oceans every single minute. To think about this, and the reality is much of that comes from 7 rivers that aren't in the US, but we are still having a very meaningful impact on that. And so, and there's other industries have done a much, frankly, candidly, much better job than we have of addressing that issue. So how do we take plastics out of our supply chain? And a lot of times it's just unnecessary, right? Like the polybag piece, there's no reason that, in our case, we can't just roll pack clothes or can't use recycled plastics. And, you know, we have a goal around 80% of our polyester to be recycled by 2025. And it's not, a lot of it's not hard, and frankly, it's not even expensive. It's just kind of, you've got to sit down with all the leaders and say, well, here's our goals, and then check it off the list. You know, little wins along the way. You said kind of a big lofty goal out in the distance, and then you find lots of little wins along the way. But, so anyways, yeah, that's sort of the kind of the yes, financial is a piece of it, but if you're not in the spot to kind of get involved on the financial side, great. There's a lot of other things you can do. And the main one is, the cheapest of them is you've got probably a giant email list or a giant social page or some sort of giant customer base list. So how do you use that to then get these messages out back to the consumers?
It's a lot. Like you said, it's not just the 10%. It's also using it the right ways and really making it almost a sustainable effort to continue as well. And so if you didn't know, Yamaha is also doing a lot on sustainability these days. And I think that Martin's helped drive that. Why don't you tell me, Martin, and the rest of the group here, what's driving Yamaha for sustainability?
Well, I would say there's a long history of conservation at Yamaha, and that was based upon the idea that 70% of those who boat fish. So folks at the company fished, and our customers fished, and we came to the conclusion, I think long ago, that we had to be good stewards of the resource. There had to be sustainable fisheries if we kept wanting to do what we do. And that is what originally drove the company. What's happened is that sustainability has become much bigger at Yamaha. In recent years, we created the Yamaha Right Waters sub-brand, and we started to really strategically look at those things that we ought to be doing. So we've moved into things like removing plastics from our supply chain as well. So it has become a much more comprehensive effort, but one still that is based upon the idea that we are accountable. We must be good stewards for the resources that our customers and we enjoy using.
Yeah.
Martin won't say it, so I'll say it for him, but there's no one I've taken this from Dad, really, there's no one in this room who's done more on the conservation side for the sport than Yamaha. And the amount of time that they've put in behind the scenes, which, you know, a lot of this is, there's a real marketing benefit to all of this. Frankly, you know, some of this there's a selfish marketing benefit to this, but in Yamaha's case, there's so many decades of work and effort behind the scenes to kind of drive these initiatives forward at the state and federal levels. Yep. That, you know, it's if you guys are looking for, on the conservation policy side, if you're looking for someone to model your solutions after, go straight to Yamaha, because they have done so much in that regard.
And it goes back to the leadership that they've had, and Ben Special, as you said, he'll say, of course we're doing it for the health and well-being of our oceans and our waterways, but he goes, it sells more motors. If we don't have the good, healthy waters, we're not going to be selling a lot of motors. And so it's smart. Can you give us an example? Again, you talk about the plastics. I don't know if everybody really knows about your efforts in getting plastics out of the water.
Sure. We've done a couple of things. One is to get them out of our own supply chain. There's polyethylene and polypropylene that's used to ship some of our products. And in fact, there's some partners here in the room who are shipping those materials back to us. We're sending them to a pyrolysis facility. That pyrolysis facility then takes the polyethylene and polypropylene and converts it back into its raw material, so it truly becomes circular. It is at this point in its infancy. It's a bit expensive because it involves a fair amount of shipping. As pyrolysis facilities come online and they grow, it'll be a lot easier to remove those things from our supply chain. Ultimately, we hope to find some replacements for some of the things the packaging that we're using now in addition. But to some degree, you have to use those materials. But we need to be able to dispose of them in a circular way as well, and we're working towards that. We continue to work towards that.
That's great. So Casey, we've kind of talked about this before. There's things that AFTCO is also doing on that sustainability front and what you're doing with plastics. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I think the start of that conversation is, and really for this group, I think the thing that we're missing as an industry is how do we become resources for each other? Because the reality is we were going to address our packaging, and it was small things. It was using the right certified and recycled paper on our hang tags, right? Or it was, so what are the alternatives to the polybag conversation? Or using just recycled polyester as a start, but you mentioned on a keyword there's circularity, right? Like just because you're using recycled plastics, that's not fixing our plastic problem, right? It's helping, but it's not fixing the problem. But I think there's what I'd love to see happen ultimately for the industry is how do we get to a place where we're able to trade ideas? We've reached out to competitors outside of our space, and they have been so damn generous with information. And I think that's for us to learn from Sims or for them to learn from us. And I think there's probably a lot more to be done there as an industry, because we ask around this room and everyone's got their own little niches going on, and they're all impactful and wonderful. But what we haven't figured out a way to do is how do we get an information share between all of us, because it's out there. We just need to kind of round it all up and then set some collective goals and move forward against it.
Was it a difficult decision to talk about using plastics to make clothing? Is it something that just was natural, or how does that come about?
I think the reality is there's a couple conversations here, and the plastics one's pretty easy. There's not a lot of folks offended by, I love plastics, it's a great material, but how do we, they last for hundreds of years in the environment, if not longer. They then degrade into little microplastics that end up in our ecosystem. But so I think the working through the plastics issue was not a hard one. I think some of the harder issues are the diversity conversation, right? And one of you had shared some stats around the reality is fishing is today an old white guy sport, and as a future old white guy, we're making less of us going forward, right? So how do we find a way to reach out to different demographics, new demographics, and you probably have some better answers there.
And if I could piggyback on what you're saying about going back to the marketing piece and this being somewhat of a marketing opportunity, what we're seeing, we do a lot of research to inform our campaigns, and what we're seeing is that these younger audiences, these new audiences coming in really, really value that conservation piece. It's very important to them, and it plays into what brands they shop from, what stores they go to, what restaurants they go to. So we have been creating, and really we're seeing this over the last couple of years. This is like our new wave of pandemic participants who are younger and more diverse than we've ever seen. We've created new conservation content, and it's outperforming anything we've ever done in the past on the topic. It's a way to connect with new customers and bring them in, for the long term.
And I would say then the harder conversation that I don't know how to have, and frankly, very few of us know how to have in here is, and Martin, I'd love to hear your answer on it, but is because when you speak to the next generation, the topic of climate change is important to them. And if you look at MMA and every other industry in this, that kind of we sit alongside, they're at least having that conversation. And so I think Martin, to maybe get your insights into, because that is talking about hard conversations to have. It gets real political and messy, and right. Clearly the climate is changing, but so I would kind of look to you to see.
No, I'll tell you, we have some preliminary research. We're going to do a lot more deep research next year, but currently 52% of Yamaha outboard owners believe that man is responsible for climate change, and that's a shift. And the younger...
do you know what it would have been 10 years ago?
I do not.
Yeah.
I do not.
Would have been less than that, certainly.
It's shifted from recent years that we've looked
Yeah.
at. And a lot of... it'll continue to change as... It'll continue to change as as people come up into the sport.
Yeah.
No.
So we have to address it.
I'll bring it full circle again, that we're talking about the consumer, and this is what the consumer is identifying as important to them, and bringing that back internally. We're all challenged with filling roles and hiring and retaining talent. And again, they want purpose as well. So these are not exclusive conversations. They all fit together. And that's why I think, to Casey's point, we need to be a source of information, and we need to create an opportunity for all of us to be able to collaborate and then rise the organization together. And I think you mentioned you can have this big goal, but the really important thing is to identify that you break those down into nuggets, right? Work on bits at a time, so you're not looking at this ominous overarching thing. You can break it down, and then that demonstrates to your team members and to your customers that you are working on it, and their role in that, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
So, Diane, with that said, this is, it sounds like it's a part of the Sims philosophy is of the future of fishing, and it gets back to that relationship and partnership and what they're thinking. Is there more to that?
Yeah, so that is really our conservation and sustainability initiative, and how we engage with our employees and our consumers is not different. And so we want to identify, and we'll start with our home rivers, and a commitment that we did with Trout Unlimited for a specific river in Montana, Gallatin River. And that was a similar concept of bringing many nonprofits together to think about how we can protect that river, not just Trout Unlimited, but all of those nonprofits. So we're working together to create a sustainable and healthy fishery. And I think acts like that are really important when you're working together. And it's been really successful. We also have a sustainability initiative at Sims. We're working on plastics. We're doing recycling our water products. We have solar energy on our roof that's running 25% of our electricity and all of our hot water. We're wanting to grow that. And then we also changed up our packaging and removed inks. We're big on orange and black colors, and when we were doing a lot of the black ink on our packaging, we were recognizing that was not recyclable. Huh. So we did a complete flip of our packaging. So it can be anything that you know, and you can identify it. We've also repurposed a lot of materials. You mentioned having product in the system. So we made a Fish It Well tote last fall.
I saw that. That was really
cool. Took out worn-out waders and turned it into a fishing tote, and we donated the proceeds to Deschutes River Alliance. So a wader goes full circle and gives back to the river. So and that makes our employees understand their role, and it also engages with the community to understand what their role is in advocacy.
It's pretty cool, and I think it's. I give you a lot of credit for taking that on, and I know a lot of folks in the fly industry have focused a lot more on that, and we, I'll just say, as a general sport fishing industry, probably have not spent as much time on that subject. And you might not think of it in the outboard engine industry, but Yamaha has been thinking a lot about that as far as even carbon emissions, and Yamaha's made some pretty bold statements in recent months. Can you describe that a little bit more?
Yes, from a global perspective. From a Yamaha Motor Corporation perspective, there's a commitment to by 2035 to decarbonize Scope 1 and Scope 2 in all of our operations.
What is Scope 1 and Scope 2?
Scope 1 and Scope 2 refers to your operational carbon emissions. So anything that has to do with producing your products, moving your products around, using any energy in the creation of those products. We've committed to a 2035 target, which means that in the United States, we are working very feverishly to do things like reduce energy use and also to use renewables where we can. And in fact, we have a number of solar projects that are underway right now.
So 2035, the commitment is not zero emissions, right?
Correct.
What does that mean?
This gets weedy. It's a percentage from a baseline.
Okay.
And I don't think it's helpful.
I'm interested. I don't know.
Yeah, it is. This is one of the things that I think is true, is that this is a very complicated business of getting to neutrality. It's not as simple as you might imagine. The real challenge, though, is what's called Scope 3, which is the emissions that our consumers create when they use the product, which of course we create emissions because we have internal combustion engines in our products. It's a very small amount compared to all the carbon emissions that are out there, but we will have an obligation to do something about it. Well, the automotive industry has done a great job of convincing people that things can be, their conveyances can be electrified. It doesn't work as easily with boats.
No, it doesn't.
Boats consume 10 times more energy than a car does. Then you have what's called an energy density issue, right? The energy density of a battery comes nowhere near the energy density of gasoline. So how do we achieve carbon emission reductions in the future for our products? It's a challenge. It's a challenge for anyone in this business, in the marine business. And it's one that we're working on, but it's not as easy as, oh yeah, just make that electric. Yeah. Because the battery technology is not available that will have enough density of energy to give the range that people expect from a boat. So it will be a challenge.
Fair enough. Let's get back to the easy subject of participation.
Glenn, can I add one thing to that?
Sure.
It frankly gets really complicated, and this whole thing gets really complicated and political. And I think the wonderful benefit of the ASA is they are such a stable and steady resource to help people sort through that, right? Because in my perspective, there's a number of conservation groups out there who would be way too far left, way too far, let's say, out there in terms of motivations or pragmatic solutions, right? We're not going to have electric outboards. Maybe some, I don't know, but it does. Like we're going to burn, fossil fuels for a long time, and I think what the ASA provides our industry is a really stable and steady hand to sort through a lot of that. So if I've ever got a question on a group of like, what's this person's real motivations, right? Where they really fall on fishing access or on some of these issues, to go back to yourself or Mike Leonard or one of the regional members and say, hey, give me the straight on this. It has been such a helpful guidance piece. So if you guys are looking for a group or looking for an issue and you're trying to know where they really fall, to look back to the ASA, I think has been, back to the value of a collective industry. And you mentioned, working together of, how do you bring this coalition of people together to solve these problems? You need a room like this, you need a group like this to kind of sort through all these topics.
Yeah. And so it's a great point, and we do have partners in this room from TRCP and others that are maybe a little bit more focused on some of these issues as well. And so if we don't have the answers, we're going to be working with these folks. That it's always an open door policy and communicating with them, and together we're going to come up with some of these solutions. So it's all good stuff, and maybe we want to keep going deeper. And we'll come back to this, actually. We have a couple other things to ask you about, but I want to make sure we talk about participation because we didn't have a specific segment this week. It didn't fit into the schedule to really focus on the participation side of this, which is still absolutely critical to the future of our sport. And we all know about the bump that we got in 2020, and then we talked about at ICAST that we had a decline a bit in the participation in 2021. And based on license sales for 22, we're looking at another decline in participation. Again, I don't have the numbers yet, and we're not going to have them until really late spring next year as far as who they were, why they were, how many new anglers came in, how many dropped out. But ultimately, we have to continue to introduce the sport. Now, a lot of people here in this room need to focus on the retention of anglers, and I get that. We also have to focus on recruiting the new anglers. And so, Stephanie, my long-winded way of saying, you're doing what others aren't currently doing for good reason. They may not be their customer yet, but you're doing the hard work of focusing on the kids and on the families, on the Hispanics or multicultural families. Can you talk a little bit more of the importance of that and what you're doing?
Sure. So our mission is to increase participation in fishing and boating. And historically, we have largely focused on that recruitment piece. We were kind of set up to be that marketing and communications arm for the industry. And, we look at data very closely to map out everything that we're doing. And over the last 10 plus years, we've been seeing these huge shifts in our population, more Hispanics, you know, and other groups as well. We are trying to plant the seed, but we don't sell anything. People don't buy anything from us. We don't have that customer data. So it really needs to be a whole industry effort, state agencies, fishing and boating industry, trying to retain these people. What we're seeing trend-wise, it's interesting. We have successes we can celebrate over the last 7, 8 years. Recruitment has been going up. We're adding more and more newcomers each year, which is great. And we're seeing gains in those groups, the younger folks, the multicultural, the female, the Hispanic. That's all good news. But as I mentioned earlier, that churn keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. 5, 6 years ago, we were losing about 5 to 6 million people a year. Post-COVID, we lost 14 million. I mean, it's staggering. We knew it would be high because a lot of new folks came in, but that's more than double. That's almost triple. We need to engage these new audiences and give them a reason to keep coming back. And it's something that we're elevating in the work that we do because this churn has gotten so bad, but it's something we need the industry's help with.
Was churn higher among a specific group? Do we even know that?
Yes, but I mean, yes, we know that. It's interesting because every age group churned out, everything. But we did see, for example, we talk about the older white male kind of aging out of the sport. That 55 plus group has gone from 18% of the lost anglers to 35% in the last 3 years.
Huh.
So that is definitely ramping up, which is, sets up that critical need for engaging with the new consumer. Getting them in.
I think, Glenn, if I can jump in here real quick, I think you made a great point that RBFF doesn't sell a product. So what we find is that they are a resource for information. They have the data, they know who is engaging and interacting. And then it's our job to figure out how we can start building those relationships and connecting with those folks. And we have found that it takes a long time, and you shared the data earlier. You have to work hard to start to build that trust and build a relationship, and you have to then connect with them at a level that they see themselves in your marketing and on your social media, and that they become familiar and comfortable. And I think we all have this great resource and really encourage everyone to use the data, but don't expect that RBFF is carrying the torch of expanding our market and our consumer base.
Yeah, I think it's a great point because, and so I'm going to move ahead right for you guys, for your sake, to know that we're going to talk about this group question right now. If fishing participation drops, it's not all because necessarily people didn't have a good time fishing or the waters weren't necessarily clean. It's also because it's a population situation here. If you look at the demographics of the United States of America, and it's easy to look up as I did last week, if you look at the census, that from 2010 to 2020, for the first time, it'd be the white population, non-Hispanic white population, dropped below 60% in the United States. First time. It's going to continue because from 2010 to 2020, the largest, fastest group is the Hispanic population, which made up 51% of the growth in population from 2010 to 2020. It's a numbers game, and we have to be cognizant of it, that these indicators are impacting our business collectively. It's not necessarily a bad way, it's just a matter of what are we going to do about it. And so I'm going to ask each of you, based on the number I just said and just what you see out there, and I'm not saying that you necessarily have all the answers right now, but you're probably cognizant of it. Is there anything specifically that you might be doing, Casey, for acknowledging this changing demographic?
Yeah, I mean, the start is acknowledging it, right? Like, let's talk about it. I think we're there. We have worked through, so how do we, in our imagery, in our on-model photography, in the ambassadors we look like, if we're pulling from the current pool, it's not going to look like what the future pool looks like, right? Because of the trend lines. And so how do we set some, deliberate goals around, we do studio shots for on-model photography. So we've got some specific demographic goals of when we're going to hire models, are we including the Hispanic population? Are we including some of these demographics that may not be the guide currently? A lot of times we had historically pulled from like local captains to come be our models. Well, we've had to maybe stretch ourselves a little bit to find folks that are going to fit, the 10-year trend line or the 15-year trend line. So that's maybe one answer. It's hard, and I don't personally have a great solution to it. There's folks internally who would come from these different backgrounds who we lean on, and I think, but that's one example, and I think the bigger example is I don't know.
Okay. Fair enough.
And starting to talk about it is probably the first start.
Diane, is there something Sims is doing?
Similar, I think our tagline up till 2020 was the choice of professional guides and anglers worldwide, and we know what that looks like, right? So we did with the Fish It Well platform, that gave us a roadmap to start to think differently, and as Casey pointed out, having different folks, different people that weren't our normal professional guide look was one of the first moves, and building those relationships. So beyond hiring models, we want to have ambassadors that we get to know and that we're authentic in the relationship. We're not going out and seeking people just because they fit a particular look or position. We want to get to know them and make sure that they're consistent with the Sims brand. And so that's been a lot of effort, and it takes a long time, but it is definitely we're starting to see that change in the way we think, so that it's much more natural and it's much more, it builds our community because we've established relationships with this one individual that then creates that network that Seth talked about yesterday, and it's been really impactful. But it's not done, it's not done.
Right, no, it's just the beginning.
Yep.
Martin, you want to add anything? You could say no.
I don't think we just need to look at marketing. We have to look at all the contacts. This is a relationship business, at least the marine outboard boat business is a relationship business. And I can tell you there are a lot more folks in our company now who are multilingual. And that is part of what we need to do as a company to meet the changing demographic. And it's an ongoing effort.
You think about RBFS staff, and I'm fortunate to be around them a lot, just 3 blocks from our office, and I think there's more folks that speak multiple languages than those that don't, and it's a testament to the efforts to make sure that we're communicating with them the right way. So, yeah. Stephanie, is there more to add? Are there other interactions you have with companies that are trying to do the right thing here?
Well, I would just say, to add to what others have said here, representation is the first step. People need to see themselves in something to identify it and identify with it and want to try it. Certainly you need to go deeper than that, as Diane was saying. You need to build a relationship and make sure it's an authentic partnership where you believe it, you have shared goals and whatnot. But very plain and simple, people need to see themselves. They need to see a picture of them fishing, enjoying a day on the boat. So what we do, our recruitment efforts are about 80% of what we do. And you're not going to see, if you've ever seen the Take Me Fishing campaign, you're not going to see us in fishing magazines. You're not going to see us in, maybe even outdoor enthusiast magazines. We're going to other places where new audiences are. We're going to BuzzFeed. We're on Disney. We're in Complex and Matador, these kind of younger influencer-led platforms, because we need to show these people that fishing is for them. And it starts there and builds into bigger efforts.
I'm going to stay on this direction for right now. Dave Channon mentioned it a little bit yesterday, the strategic plan coming up for RBFF, and sort of you know, you still got to continue to reach those new anglers, but as a foundation trying to work with our industry, can you talk a little bit about the strategic plan efforts and the ideas that you have going forward for the next 3 to 5 years and how it might tie in the industry?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We want to be more involved with industry moving forward. This retention piece, the churn has gotten so high. You know, our board, our leadership has said we need to address this. And so, you know, we'll continue our recruitment efforts, but we want to start developing a more meaningful relationship with the industry where we can really support and impact change on the retention level. So, you know, moving forward, we'll kind of have this direct-to-consumer side of the house and more of the business-to-business, maybe trying to replicate some of our successes we've had with state agencies who are changing their marketing vastly. They've gone from having state fish biologists as marketers to having full marketing teams and R3 plans. You know, we want to be a valuable resource for industry. So you will see more communications and more support from us.
Yeah, so obviously Mary Beth worked closely with your group, and part of the Fishing Share the Fun program really was content that was curated and repurposed from RBFF to just, the information was always there, we just wanted to repackage it and make sure we got it out to you, and so these are some of the things we want to work on at the retail level too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited to hear the conversation, Casey's talked about it a lot, of, you know, how do we as an industry collaborate and share to help each other, because that's the piece we're missing. We do a feedback survey every year to try to understand how the tools that we do have are resonating with the industry, and we don't get a lot of input. So we need kind of this central hub where we can have conversation and share things in a confidential way. I understand nobody wants to like give away the goods, but it will benefit all of us.
And to add something, I mean, we say it, and we don't get enough damn credit for what we do as an industry on the conservation side with the excise tax piece. It's true. I mean, the industries, other industries are not doing that, right? And I think that's so important that we continue to beat that drum and lean on that. And I think at the same time, each of us in this room have on the conservation side, still have an obligation to also engage as a brand, but particularly on this issue, you're not going to be able to do it alone, right? I think sometimes there's a bit of a tendency of, well, we have RBFF, they're taking care of that. And no, I mean, their budget is not near, it can never be big enough, right? Relative to our marketing budgets in this room. So I think, especially with this issue, it's one that we can follow your lead on, it's one that we can lean on your resources from, but it's not something, don't leave this room thinking, well, great, RBFS here, they're going to take care of this diversity issue, right? They're going to help, but they are not the solution in that, and until all of us figure out a way to address it, it's not going to get fixed or tackled, not going to change.
So I would comment that sometimes you see a lot of the outward-facing things that RBFF does, but if you didn't know, they do an annual state marketing workshop. And I've gotten to participate in most of the last 10 years of these workshops, and just the evolution of the states figuring these things out is unbelievable. So 10 years ago, RBFF would say, you should do this, this is, you know, fishing licenses, boat registrations, and the states are like, we don't have any marketing people, we're biologists, we don't know how to do that, we can't do that, it's not gonna happen. But then you get one state to do it, and you find the Jennifer Wisniewski's in the crowds, and then you get another state, well, if they did it, we can do it, and then there starts to be some competition. And the next thing you know, I can remember it like it was yesterday. The folks from Massachusetts, I was sitting at a lunch with them, and they had just heard a story from Georgia, and they're like, yeah, we can't do this and that. And then they were on stage next year, and they'd had a great program put together on marketing for fishing license sales. My point for saying all that is, if any of you in the industry want to come to a state marketing workshop this winter, what's the date?
Oh, goodness.
February 27th in Houston, Texas. After the Astros lose the World Series, we're going to go there in February for the state marketing. Anybody from Philadelphia here?
But yeah, and we're batting around ideas like that, and you know, we need to hear from you. Would some kind of a similar industry marketing summit be beneficial? You know, do you need more research insights? What is it that we can do to help you solve for this retention problem.
That's where I was going. Partially, I think there's an opportunity for the industry to engage with the states, and I could go to a particular manufacturer or retailer, and they tell me their problem, and I picked it up and I went right to the state. I said, can you solve this problem? There's the connectivity, there's the opportunity, it's the relationship. So anybody, I think, in this room who wants to come to the state marketing workshop, first of all, you'll meet people that are in charge of fishing license sales in all 50 states. And so there's an opportunity to reach more of the anglers that way and have relationships with the states. But then it's really the conversations that go back and forth and the different marketing ideas. And so, yes, I'm going to be pushing Dave, and if others want to push Dave and Stephanie on the idea of having a manufacturers or sport fishing industry marketing workshop, if you will, that brings us together to talk about these issues and have RBFF help be the liaison to make that happen. So I get really excited about that. Okay, we still have a little bit of time, and I want to kind of come back to some of this other subject that is sort of the involvement of you're doing things, and now it's how can the industry and individual companies do more? So I'm interested in suggestions that you have on maybe how these companies can get started or figure out what it is that they can do to be good stewards and find their place in this. Casey, do you have?
Yeah, I've got one.
Okay.
There's a number of 501c3s here. Could you guys stand up? So these are folks that have been told by us to come to the summit, right? And they got involved each of these people got involved in this because they care about the resource or they care about youth fishing. And you know what they don't care about is sales, right? And so I think they're here because they've been told by others, show up, and you're going to find folks that want to make a difference and want to help them. So I guess my first recommendation would be look around, find the people that just stood up, and go make sure you talk to them, right? And then know that they're uncomfortable making the ask. That they're not salespeople. They're not going to say, I need $100, or I need free product, or I need $10,000. So go into that conversation knowing that these people gave their time, they gave their money and their energy, and they're doing it all the time. Specifically to the summit, they did it to show up, to meet you guys. And it doesn't have to be a lot. Oftentimes it's $100 or $1,000 or some small number to start the relationship, or it's product, or it's your website, or there's lots of ways to help that aren't necessarily a big check. But yeah, so I'd say to get started, start to create those relationships and see where they head.
It's a great point. And again, we're the trade organization. We're not going to be all things to all people. And there's reasons for these partnerships. And so not only the folks in the room, that folks aren't here as well. The Outdoor Recreation Roundtable is a combination of about 35 plus organizations that represent all of outdoor recreation. And it has had a huge impact even for the fishing and boating industry over the last few years because of the relationships they had with the administration and with different members of Congress. So that some of those bills I mentioned yesterday, Great American Outdoors Act and the ASA Act, are things that got passed because of larger groups working together on these things that can help with our sustainability and conservation efforts. Anyone else?
I'd just go back to using the data that we have from RBFF and from the other organizations that can help you to start looking at what your path might be. And then work with your team to figure out, don't start with the big mountain, break it down to littler bits, because you're not going to solve the biggest problem, but go find the resources and ask questions and connect with others, Casey, myself, anyone in the industry that has some perspective, then could share some ideas and thoughts on how to get that launched.
I like the point about starting. The whole thing is overwhelming.
Yeah.
There's like 4 topics here, and they're all super overwhelming, and they're really hard, and they're nuanced, and just try. It's like, and go into it not knowing you're not going to change the world, but go into to find small wins. And I think back to the engagement piece Seth was talking about, I think you'll also find that your internal team will, there's a lot of internal benefits from folks finding purpose in what they're doing.
Yep.
And so you go find those small wins, and I think the morale within the company is improved. And ultimately, just like, it's like a rock rolling downhill, things pick up speed, things gain momentum. And you'll look back 10 years from now and be like, holy crap,
Yes.
something happened.
And I would say you're going to make mistakes. Allow yourself to make mistakes, learn from it, and move forward. Don't stop.
Yeah. That's a really good point. You're going to fail a lot.
Yep.
I think a really, really simple first step is, a lot of people don't realize that their license fees go back to conservation. They don't know that the taxes on the equipment and their motorboat fuel go back to conservation. Talk to your customers about that. Talk to them about how what they're doing has an impact on the environment as a very, very simple first step.
I think those are great ideas, and I think I'm going to come back to Martin here because it was really his brainchild, this Yamaha Right Waters, and so if you could give an idea of, if you could inspire anyone in this room to do half of what Yamaha is doing in terms of these things, then we're going to be that much farther ahead. So can you give a little bit more on Right Waters?
Sure. First of all, thank you for saying that, but I have to say, Phil Disco, Ben Special, the leadership at Yamaha Marine has been incredible over the years and inspiring, and it's really theirs. But what we did was brand the effort, and then I want to speak to what we just discussed. The other thing that everyone probably ought to think about is budgeting dollars and setting objectives for whatever activities they become involved in, because until you start measuring it, you really don't understand what you're doing and what the impact is.
Fair.
And there's also an outcome, which is kind of interesting. When we started branding Yamaha Right Waters, we also worked with media. We tried to generate media coverage for the activities that we do, and there's a whole variety of them, whether it's plastics recycling or supporting projects that sequester carbon dioxide or whatever the projects are. We seek media coverage for it. And what we've learned is that customers want to read about it. And that has an effect as well, which is when they read about it, it boosts our brand. It has literally become a part of the brand. It's part of the brand positioning. And it has value just communicating about it.
You're saying it's a business decision.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we're doing the right thing, but this is a business decision.
Yeah.
And I think there's lots of folks in this room that understand that and that are doing a lot on that front, but I think that's a really important way to tie this all back.
That is correct. And it has a value that you can actually calculate insofar as ad equivalency or however you want to measure it. But then there is also the impact on the overall presence of the brand, which has value. It has value that is you can calculate.
It's an excellent point, and I know that different organizations out here have foundations, and it's almost like they become separate entities, and they're not maybe taking advantage of that branding at the same time. I'll ask a few folks about that in the future. So we're kind of winding down on time here, and we'll open it up to some questions. But is there anything else that you wanted to share with the industry on these topics that maybe they can be doing or that I didn't cover? Not necessarily. All right, well, let's open it up to questions then. Does anyone have any questions? Mr. Frank Paul King.
Yesterday, Seth talked about frictions. What are the frictions that you see in entrants coming into the sport?
So Frank Paul asked, what are the frictions that you see coming into the industry?
Newcomers to picking up the sport. Time is always an issue, and as we know, during the COVID situation, when it was really bad, people had more time, and they went fishing in droves. I mean, we had an increase of 5 million new participants. The competition's back. You know, people are going to movies, they're going to sporting events and concerts, and we're definitely seeing a dip. Now, I like to think that time is a little bit of an excuse because you make time for the things that you love. But you think about how many messages we're competing with today. People are being inundated at every turn. So if our value proposition isn't good enough, they're going to choose something else. If they have a difficult time getting their license or they have a bad experience on the water, they're going to be like, I'm done with this. I have so many other options. So it's the competition and the time.
I'm going to add something that I've seen over the years, and we're discussing more with RBFF folks, that friction of, and I'm using the term friction from yesterday, but there's a disconnect still between all the information that's provided, like Stephanie said, and then getting it down to the consumer level through the retailer. Because the retailer generally is the one that's touching or communicating with the end user. And a lot of you, most people in the room are also selling direct, but what's that relationship? Is it always just about product as opposed to lifestyle or experience or engagement? And there's opportunity there, and I feel like that friction is that we spend a lot of time selling products, not necessarily reminding them why we participate in this sport.
That's a really great point, and just to expand on that a little bit, I think everyone in this room has an opportunity to help their customer have a better experience on the water, not just sell a product. Are you asking them if they need a place to go? Do they, need help teaching a newcomer? Do they, people just want to be taken care of. They just want a source that's there for them and can, help them into the activity and have success.
Do we have other questions? Yes, sir. Behind Bill.
So I brought this up to the PR committee yesterday so they can kind of start rolling their eyes now. But I wanted to bring it up with you guys. I think it's very on topic. You guys have talked a lot about the conservation and marketing that goes around that. As a manufacturer that pays into the Sport Fish Restoration Act, I picked this up in the lobby that this year $400 million has been apportioned to states through that act. The trouble I've got is if somebody that pays that taxes, I can't do a press release, or nobody's interested in a press release that I paid my taxes. And I'm not sure how, as an industry, do we make that turn. I feel like we're sending significant portions of money on behalf of conservation, but it's not built in a way that we can market around that. And I'm not sure what you guys think about that, or how we can change that.
Anybody want to address?
Go ahead.
Well, so you're right. The number we've used is it's 1.5 billion annually. If you roll up excise tax and private donations and all of it together, that's the amount that our community is contributing back
And fishing licenses.
That's the amount. That's the amount our community is contributing back to conservation. And I hammer that home. Frankly, we take credit for it. So what we do is we take credit for that number. We tell folks what our community is doing, and then we also talk about some of our issues as well. But so as a brand, that's how we use it. I don't know, specifically how the industry can better use it, but in our case, we do take credit for that number, and then we just tie into other little issues that we're talking about as well.
I just think the trouble I've got is it's way more marketable to donate than it is to pay a tax. And that's what we continue to
Fair.
struggle with.
Yeah, and I think it's in the way you position it. It is absolutely a complex message, right? We say conservation through participation, but then there's like 20,000 steps in between. We have created some tools like infographics and stuff that simplifies it, shows it visually, that you can share with your customers. But I think just saying, to your point, not calling it a tax, but saying we support this fund, we are part of this, and this is our commitment to conservation.
And I think there's an opportunity with partnerships with the states that partner with the payer. It's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Association thanking us, and that the videos are there, and let's make sure they're shared. You're allowed to share that on your websites too, and take advantage of any edification you can get. But it's okay to also thank your customers, who are also, by the way, paying for it because you passed the cost along to them. And the states need to do that as well. Bill?
Yeah, we talked about how does a manufacturer get involved in conservation. I'll give you a simple example that will help. So the state of North Carolina, Gene from Bass helped introduce us to the folks from North Carolina. We asked them for bass fishing, what's needed in your state? What's really needed is additional vegetation. They got people that will plant it, they don't have enough. What we really need in this state is, can you hear me back there? What we really need in this state is,
Mic drop.
We are recording this session, Bill, if you wouldn't mind using them. Thank you.
I'm gonna have to ask my son how to
No.
Here? Okay. Sorry. So what we really need is a full-fledged greenhouse. It's going to cost us about $500,000. We said, well, we don't have $500,000, but we'll give you $25,000 a year for 4 years. Would that help? They said, well, that's huge because we can now go to our state and we can use that. Hey, there's a tackle manufacturer from California that wants us to help build this greenhouse that we need. So then ASA steps up with Fish America. They contribute $25,000. So now they've got $125,000. They said it was going to take 4 years to get it done. Now they're saying, just with a little bit of help they've got and the pressure that puts on their state, now they say it's going to take 18 months to get it done. And so my point to you all is, if there's a manufacturer here from North Carolina, you can get involved in that specific project, helping with the Bass Nation folks there, plant this vegetation. You can contribute $500 to this effort, or some smaller amount, and now the state can go back to its legislature and say, we not only have 2 entities from the sport fishing community, we've got 3. You don't have to talk about whether the contribution was what part of the $125,000, now the $126,000 that's contributed. Having 3 folks involved, that's a bigger deal for them. So there's, if you want to have some involvement in this particular project, it's a valuable one, it's a needed one. Talk to Gene, talk to Casey, talk to myself. That's one simple way for not a lot of money, and then you can market it directly to how you want to market it. And I think it was already mentioned up here, there's an ancillary value to finding ways to give back to the resource, to conservation. And it's with the folks that work for you. I think it was said up here a minute ago, what was it, that 70%, what was the number? 70% of the work satisfaction comes from the feeling about the company.
That's right.
If people in your company feel like your company is doing good things for the fish, they're going to feel better about your company. You're going to have a better employee. You're going to have a better company.
Thank you, Bill. That's going to end the session. Let's give our folks a big round of applause for this.